week we got a brand new Hunger Games novel. It's called Sunrise on the Reaping. I don't have to tell you, this is one of the most anticipated books of this year. I saw all those TikToks of people like lined up at midnight being like, I can't wait to get my hands on a copy. The group chat's here. They are ready to get into it. Let's go. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Look, just to catch you up really quickly, Sunrise on the Reaping is a prequel to the original Hunger Games trilogy. Those books are about Katniss Everdeen, and this new one is about Haymitch. And if you read the originals, then you maybe remember that Haymitch is Katniss's mentor. If you've seen the movies, he's played by Woody Harrelson in those movies. But in Sunrise on the Reaping, we meet Haymitch 24 years earlier when he competes in the Hunger Games at only 16 years old. Arizona O'Neil is here, Lou Aburawi is here, and they're ready to get into it. Lou and Arizona, nice to see you. Welcome back to the show. How's it going?
Great, thank you.
Come on, so much to talk about. Arizona, maybe I'll start with you on this one. Can you just set up the book for people who maybe are not well-versed in the Hunger Games?
Yes, well, I mean, if you haven't heard about the Hunger Games in the past, since 2008 when it originally came out, you're living under a rock. So I don't know how much.
We don't have to go back that far. You know, yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So like you said, this is a prequel, and it's not the first prequel she's put out for the Hunger Games. But this one follows Haymitch, like you said, was her mentor in the original games. He was an alcoholic, and there wasn't much about, he was such a tormented character, but there wasn't a lot about him. And in this book, we go into the Hunger Games with him. But what is so interesting is that many characters from the revolution in the final books is there. You have Beatty, Wyrus, Plutarch, who's played by Philip Seymour Hoffman, Mags. Just an array of characters appear in this book, and it's so exciting.
Yeah, I have to remember, like, I remember so distinctly the moment that you meet Haymitch, both in the books and the movies, because there, you know, he lives in the Victor's Village in District 12. However, there's only ever been one victor of the Hunger Games from District 12, and he was, in fact, Haymitch himself. So he just kind of like lives in some luxury, but alone as an alcoholic while the rest of the district kind of suffers. There's a lot going on here. This is a second prequel that Suzanne Collins has added to this show, to this series, rather. Arizona, can you just walk me through this idea of adding another prequel? Because it's exciting, but also I think it's a bit of a risk. People have been asking for a Haymitch prequel for a minute. What do you think of it? Does it work?
Yes, well, I think that it is a risk, like you said. Sometimes I find that the readers actually know the characters better than the author. The author puts the characters out into the world and leaves us for interpretation, and we spend years with them. So to do a prequel is a risk. And the original, the first prequel that came out, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, followed President Snow, and it was not well received. Actually, my partner who works at a bookstore says that this new one is selling 10 times better. So in every comment section under the other prequel, you had people being like, where's Haymitch's games? We want to know more about Haymitch. You know, nobody had asked for this Snow prequel. Yeah.
Yeah. Haymitch Hive, we write it done. I get it. I'm kind of like on board with this. That's me. That's me as a sort of Hunger Games reader in general.
It's everyone.
Well, Lou, what do you think of the book? Did you like it?
I thought it was amazing. I thought it was a perfect prequel because it connected all of these Easter eggs that we see in the Hunger Games. So flash forward 23 years, you think that they're different circumstances, but they're very much the same, except the catalyst, the trigger happens with Haymitch. He is the spark that eventually lights up this entire revolution. The way, I mean, you were mentioning earlier how it is this dystopian world. I mean, the politics, the violence, the lack of humanity, the spectatorship is so well done and excellently written by Suzanne. I agree with you. Like, I don't think anyone writes YA dystopia like she does.
Can I just ask you a little bit more about the thing that you just said? Because when we do sort of meet Katniss Everdeen, she is in fact the person who, you know, we see her lead this revolution against the Capitol, and it sort of fails, but it sort of works. And like there's something kind of successful about the way that she delivers it. But what you're saying is, in this book, you see sort of the earlier seeds of this revolution. How does that play out in Sunrise on the Reaping?
Well, you see that people, or all the districts, are sort of gaining more and more consciousness and how this entire setup is not fair. And it's not just Katniss, it's all of the characters that Arizona mentioned, how everyone plays a small part into making this entire revolution explode. Katniss is the face, she is the bronze, but I wouldn't necessarily say she is the brains.
No.
The brains are all the characters that you meet in this book. And that also applies to President Snow because he is not a silly man at all. He's very smart. And so even in his villain character, he is very smart. And I think just seeing these characters at their inception, the first time that they endure this type of brutality, you understand why they are the way they are in the Hunger Games.
So the thing that you just said there is the thing that I admire so much about Suzanne Collins' writing. Arizona, to me, the reason that Suzanne Collins is so smart and so like well above any other writer who's trying to sort of pull in political structures into YA writing is that she's attuned to the fact that when you see a revolution and see a character sort of become the face of that revolution, all of these forces had to go into the making of that revolution, and she does not ignore them because I think like, there's a lot of temptation to go like, oh, this is the face of that revolution. This is the sort of singular face of how this sort of came to be. And Suzanne is kind of very well attuned to the construction of the world around that person. And I guess this makes me think about the fact that like it's been 17 years since the first book came out. There's been something kind of enduring about the way that people think about the Hunger Games and share Hunger Games memes. Every time something dystopian happens, people go like, this reminds me of the Hunger Games in some kind of way. What do you think it is about these books that have made them stay so relevant?
Well, that's the beauty of dystopian writing. We often revisit old dystopian books like 1984 by George Orwell. We always talk about how he predicted the amount of surveillance we would be under, or Octavia Butler, The Parable of the Sower. She predicted Make America Great Again. Now, I'm using the word predicted, but that's not at all the case, right? A good dystopian author will look at the world, look at our history, and feed it back to us in, literature. So that's exactly what Susan Collins is doing here. And, in 2008, when it came out, we never could have predicted that we would be watching a genocide live streamed on our phones and watching children die in such a fashion. So I think, it was relevant when it came out for the, issues that were happening then. Originally, it was like, a critique on reality television, but now we revisit it because a good dystopian book can fit into any political structure that we find ourselves in.
I think about that idea of what we are watching on our screens and the logical extension of where that will take us. Because, Lou, that is one of the sort of founding origin points of the Hunger Games to begin with. Suzanne Collins has kind of talked about how when she wrote the original books, it was because like she was flipping the channels between the Iraq War and reality TV. And for her, those images kind of began to meld. They began to meld, and like, this idea of you're literally watching images of war, but they're become kind of abstracted because they are on television. And then they're abstracted while at the same time you're humanizing people who have to go through all these sort of gladiatorial battles on shows like Survivor, and there's something about the mashup of those two images, and that's kind of how you get the Hunger Games. I don't think she would have imagined, the way that we engage with social media now. But what is different about reading the Hunger Games now, you think, Lou?
I think when we read the Hunger Games, the original trilogy, we were so young, at least the young adult audience that consumed that media.
Speak for yourself, pal, because I was not. I was already an adult.
You were a youngish. Okay. You were a youngish man.
Okay, you're right. All right. I'll take it. Yeah.
And so there was so much distance, right? The reality of our situation, we were kids, we were younger, we couldn't really fathom how big this war was. But now, fast forward, most of us are adults reading Sunrise, and the distance of being part of this process is no longer there. We are much more active in the process as political creatures, whether we vote or are consumers in this society. I think the degrees of separation have shrunk a lot, and it's now more reflexive on us and our role that we play as people, where we put our money, how we talk about genocide, how we support, people who enable genocide. And so it's much more real and less fiction because, like Arizona was saying, dystopia takes themes that we are already used to and augments them. But when we read The Hunger Games, it seemed so unfathomable that this would ever happen. But now it has happened and we are part of this narrative. So what are we going to do about it? I think that's why it hits harder this time around for me.
Yeah, the idea of a book sort of directly engaging you and your place in the conversation, that does feel more urgent. Arizona, I'm also sensitive to the fact that, when the original books came out, it onboarded a certain, sector of readers. Those readers will have probably stuck with the Hunger Games, but also Suzanne Collins is still interested in engaging young readers. So how do you think this book sort of balances the idea of, I spoke to you, 15, 20 years ago, and we were engaged in a certain conversation with the original trilogy. I want to continue that conversation while also bringing in a kind of new audience.
Yeah, well, I think that one of the most interesting things about the book is its themes of revolution and how we can make a difference. So that's why I think it's really important for kids now, where there's a lot of nihilism about, our impact that we can have on a lower level. And when we enter these games, I wasn't expecting the characters to be part of the revolution that will eventually happen 25 years later. All their small little actions do actually build up. And one of these beautiful moments at the beginning of the book, it's one of the kids' birthdays, and the Capitol gives all the children cake, and they all refuse to eat the cake. And that is their little, defiance against the system. And so everyone who participates in the games, all the way to its creation, probably have been fighting against the system. It was, like you said, it wasn't just Katniss who brought in that catalyst. It was really a buildup. And we see this now with the tariff war going on and how we are not we're trying not to travel to the United States, buy Canadian. And we wonder if that will have an impact. But the truth is that on a lower level, children, teenagers, adults, we have to, defy in the little ways that we can. And that does actually build up.
Yeah, there's something resonant for me about that idea, Lou, because I've never, when I sort of witness I see a lot of nihilism on social media, the idea that the world will never change. It just sort of is this awful thing. And to me, it's always kind of felt like liberation, social change. Those projects are projects that genuinely take generations, and they always will take generations. And you sort of have to get out of the transactional realm of saying, if I put in this effort, I will see its fruits now. It's like, that doesn't always bear out. That's and that's something that I think even Suzanne Collins fully understands in this work. Lou, when you think about this book, what are you taking away from this book?
Well, I think the nostalgia for me really hit home. It really made me self-aware, a bit more self-aware in the role that I play as a human, as a person to person. I think it is a reality check, like you said. So many years on, it is a different it's in the past, but it's a different Hunger Games for us. And yet we're learning new lessons with Haymitch, understanding his story and how, trauma can persist. But trauma isn't like a person's entire identity. And this sort of very cynical approach to the world is often a facade to the human spirit wanting to persevere. I think it's so easy to be cynical and so easy to give up, but it's harder to have hope. And I think this is what this book says, and this is what it means to me.
Arizona, last word to you here. Why do you think it's important for young people to have a series like The Hunger Games to just kind of keep returning to, regardless of, the moment that you exist in?
Yeah, so I worked in a children's bookstore for a long time, and The Hunger Games was always a hard sell to parents because it seems so violent, children killing each other in an arena. But that's not at all what it is. I actually find the books, she deals with violence on a very, approachable level. It's not the main story. And I think it's important for children particularly, to identify and to feel a connection and to feel empathy for characters who are going through tragedy, so that when they see because it's hard to connect with people on the news, and so they can project these characters into the children they see going through tragedy as well.
I think
it's beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really great place to leave it. I appreciate your time. I appreciate both of you reading this book way before me. I'm going to turn my attention to it, I promise, next week. I'm getting around to it. Let's go. But in the meantime, Arizona, Lou, I appreciate your time. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Of course. Talk to you
So
soon.
much.
Arizona O'Neill is an illustrator based in Montreal and the author of the upcoming graphic memoir, Opioids and Organs. Lou Aburawi talks about books on TikTok. You can find her at Lou, that's 2 L's and 7 U's. Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins is out now. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and this is Commotion. Earlier this week, I saw a tweet from Yuval Abraham. He's one of the co-directors of No Other Land, which won the Oscar this year for Best Documentary Feature. He wrote that his fellow co-director, Hamdan Ballal, had been attacked by a group of settlers in the occupied West Bank that was taken away by Israeli soldiers, and then he hadn't seen Hamdan since. The next day, the Israeli military released Hamdan. Authorities said that he was detained for throwing rocks at settlers. Hamdan and those who were with him say that that didn't happen. Hamdan says he was handcuffed all night and beaten at the military base. The IDF has not responded to Hamdan's claiming that the soldiers beat him there. There have been so many headlines involving the documentary No Other Land. To talk about what's happening with this movie, Matt Carey's here. He's a documentary editor at Deadline.com. Matt, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Elamin.
Yes, of course. Listen, you're coming to us right now from Copenhagen. You're at the Copenhagen International Documentary Festival. Tell me about the reaction there when the news broke of Hamdan's detainment.
Well, there was really immediate reaction officially from the festival, which released a statement condemning what happened to him. And, you know, it certainly took the narrative, I think, of the filmmakers. It did not really acknowledge what the IDF or Israeli authorities were saying happened. But so, you know, one can, that's not surprising in that sense, but they said that they were deeply horrified and shocked to learn that Hamdan Ballal, co-director of No Other Land, was attacked by armed settlers in the West Bank. And again, certainly Hamdan rather, has said that the sort of narrative advanced by Israeli authorities is false and that he was at his home. Israeli settlers came to it. He came outside and they attacked him and beat him severely. And then he was taken into custody. So, but then released, as you say.
Yuval's tweet, it said that he was put into an ambulance, and then authorities took him out of the ambulance and then took him to that military base. Like that was the claim that Yuval Abraham, the co-director, made of this, of Hamdan's detainment. I want to get into why this movie has been the subject of so much conversation, and I really hesitate to call it a controversial film because I don't think there's anything particularly in the film that is controversial. I do think the reaction to it, though, has been maybe something else. And so you chose No Other Land as one of your top 10 documentaries last year. Why did it stand out for you?
I certainly was not alone in that by any means.
No, not at all.
The film has won well over 60 awards around the world, and some of the most significant awards that there are in documentary, including at the Berlin Film Festival where it premiered. It won the top award for documentary there. I think, speaking for myself, I just was very touched by its depiction of the anguish in life for Palestinians in this very rural area of the West Bank who get next to no attention for what they go through. They have been living for many decades under an expulsion order from the Israel Defense Forces, which claim their land as a military training zone. And so we see them in their homes. Then they're sort of have their possessions tossed out, and bulldozers from the IDF come in, knock their homes down, knock down schools. But it's a very rare glimpse into the lives and experience and emotional reality for Palestinians that, again, we have not really seen depicted in documentary very much, and certainly not even in narrative fictional films.
The intensity of the reaction to this movie has been surprising to me in some regards because there were just like some lengths that I just didn't think that people would go to prevent people from seeing this film. And a good example of this is about how like the mayor of Miami Beach wanted to evict a cinema, you know, like the cinema that is like on public land, on like city land, but nonetheless an operating cinema that was screening No Other Land. And he said that he would evict them for screening that film. He later dropped that threat, but still doesn't change that the threat, you know, was made. What do you think it is about this movie that has made it, you know, this kind of site of so much tension?
Well, I think any film that's going to touch on Israel and Palestine is going to be a bit of a lightning rod. And no matter what position it stakes out, no matter how humanitarian, for instance, a perspective it may try to take on the issue, it's going to upset probably a lot of people on one side of the issue or the other. So I think that's kind of inevitable. I found it very interesting that through most of the awards season, as we approached the Academy Awards, No Other Land kept winning award after award, and it didn't really attract within the Academy, the Motion Picture Academy, that much controversy. I kept waiting for there to be a backlash, because actually one of the other films that qualified for Oscar consideration this year was originally called October Hate, H-A-8. TE. It was later changed to October 8.
Right.
This was really an examination of protests that developed on American college campuses after October 7th. And it was a very, very ardently pro-Israel film. So I just thought, wow, in this context, there's going to be a lot of Academy voters who will reject No Other Land. That didn't happen. And in fact, on March 2nd, when the Oscars happened, and the film No Other Land was announced as the winner of Best Documentary Feature, there was a standing ovation from the audience, and Yuval Abraham was one of the co-directors, and Basil Adra, the Palestinian co-director of the film, spoke on behalf of the film. Their remarks were interrupted by applause several times, so it was warmly greeted by the Academy. But then, as you say, really after it won, that's when people have really been attacking it, say on social media, certain things that I've written on deadline.com. You read the comments, and there are people who say, this is biased, it's anti-Semitic propaganda. And that's essentially what the mayor of Miami Beach said. He claimed to have seen the film, said that it was completely one-sided and unfair. And as you said, it just so happens that the theater showing it was is on city-owned land, so they had some leverage over that cinema.
Yeah.
And he advanced a resolution calling for the cinema's lease to be canceled. You know, cooler heads prevailed, and as you say, he sort of withdrew that resolution. The film is being seen fairly widely in the United States, even though it doesn't have an official distributor.
I want to come back to that distributor idea in just a moment, because I think that is also an interesting conversation to talk about. But just on the thing that you just said there, the idea of you expected some reaction inside the Academy to say, I don't know about this movie, some kind of pushback. And then it doesn't happen. And not only does it not happen, it ends up going on to win the Oscar.
Yeah.
What difference has winning the Oscar made for a movie like No Other Land?
Well, I think it has made a significant difference for it. I mean, you can look at Anora, winner of Best Picture. I think its box office fortunes were improved by that. It has an even more direct impact, I think, on a documentary. So many documentaries don't even get into theaters. In this case, they did essentially self-distribute the film. I was speaking with someone from Cinetic, which is the sort of independent distributor and media company that is behind it. And one of their senior people told me that they expected to cross the $2 million mark in box office revenue this weekend. And that's just in the US and Canada alone. It is screening in Toronto at the Lightbox and doing very well there, from what I understand. So it helps when a documentary has won the Academy Award. It becomes part of the cultural currency. People know that it's very, very timely. Obviously, people around the world are deeply concerned about what's happening, not only in the West Bank, of course, in Gaza. So it's a super timely film. And I think people want to be part of the conversation and want to understand, why is this film being embraced? So winning that Oscar has really improved its fortunes quite a bit.
Matt, I want to go back to the struggles that it has had, or the conversations that we've been having about this movie, and the ways that it's sort of maybe not had the distribution life that one might expect. But before we do that, I got to say goodbye to our radio audience. So we're going to do that. I'm going to hold on to you for just a moment and tell folks that the rest of this conversation will be available on YouTube and on podcast. I'm speaking with Matt Carey. He's a documentary editor at deadline.com, and he co-hosts the Doc Talk podcast. I'll come back to that in just a moment. And then before I let the radio audience go, I just want to tell you that we are doing a book giveaway. You can find that on our Instagram. You can find a winning copy, the book that won Canada Reads this year. That is, of course, A Two-Spirit Journey by Manisha Kabe. To find out more on how you can enter and get that book giveaway, find us on Instagram at Commotion CBC. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We will be back tomorrow, and I will see you then. Okay, Matt, I just want to pick up exactly where we left off there, because you've sort of talked about the box office life that this documentary has had, and it's rare for a documentary to sort of pull in the amount that is pulled in. That is playing a lot of independent cinemas. It has not had a sort of wider distribution. How unusual is this life, in terms of winning an Oscar without really having distribution? What's the story there?
That's very, very unusual. Very, very unusual. There have been some documentaries in recent years that were nominated, but didn't have U.S. distribution or distribution in Canada. So they've been able to break through in that respect. But the actual win, I'm not aware of any other films that have won the Oscar without having distribution. No other land has certainly been distributed around the world, sort of piecemeal and territory by territory. And
you mentioned Canada, like independent. Some independent cinemas, TIFF Lightbox is in Toronto is doing that. You've seen other sort of independent cinemas do that. Sorry, continue.
Well, I was just going to say that not very many documentaries are actually getting a chance to test their potential in the theatrical market. Yeah. This has really changed a lot after COVID. We had a year or two right before that, where, for instance, Free Solo and Won't You Be My Neighbor did 17, 18, 19 million dollars at the box office, which is enormous. Yeah. That's like a blockbuster for documentaries. Yeah. That was utterly decimated by COVID. So very few films or nonfiction films are distributed theatrically at all. But to make more than $2 million, it's certainly over $2 million worldwide now, it's quite a significant sum of money. It's certainly more than any other of the Oscar nominees this year in the Best Feature category.
So you're telling me it takes a documentary about Mr. Rogers to pull in numbers like this? That's
well, there was a little golden period there. IBG, which was about late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that did very, very well. Three Identical Strangers. So there was like a great moment there right before the pandemic, where documentaries like, wow, people are going to theaters, and then no. So that's kind of very unfortunate, but we're seeing some exceptions now, so that's great.
I guess maybe to end the conversation, let me ask you about this. Let me ask you about this idea of, we are sitting in this moment where I don't think I've seen a documentary cause as much conversation as No Other Land since maybe Bowling for Columbine. And I was in high school when Bowling for Columbine was causing all that conversation. And so do you want to talk about how high stakes it feels maybe to be having all of these really intense conversations around this one film, and how unusual that is?
Well, it is interesting. Every year, of course, there's different contenders for Best Documentary Feature. I think in recent years, there have been certain films that have taken on a kind of inevitability. It just seems their year. They're tied in with a very urgent topic. For instance, the film that won a year ago was 20 Days in Mariupol, about the siege of Mariupol in the early days of the Ukraine war. So that was super timely. That won Best Documentary Feature. A few years ago, Citizen 4 won, directed by Laura Poitras. That felt very much about Edward Snowden, very much of the moment. So sometimes a film takes on this kind of energy. It hits at the right time. It cannot have been planned that way.
No.
In the sense that documentaries typically take 4, 5, 6, 7 years. You never know what the political or geopolitical climate will be when they come out. Everything aligned in terms of No Other Land. They began shooting it in 2019, obviously way before October 7th, way before the decimation of Gaza. And at that point, much of the Western world certainly was not paying very much attention to the occupied territories. So you never know when these films are going to hit. But going back to Michael Moore, it's interesting to contrast that. It won in 2003. Michael Moore was booed when he got on stage because he immediately made a bit of a political speech attacking George W. Bush. This is early on in the Iraq invasion.
Yeah.
He was not exactly, the audience just didn't react enthusiastically to his remarks. So again, that's a contrast to how No Other Land was received, where, as they said, the filmmakers were greeted with very warm applause. And so quite a distinction there, but both films certainly share that very sharp political edge to them. And the filmmakers, it's a quartet of filmmakers who made No Other Land. Two are Palestinian, two are Israeli. They've made it very clear that they see themselves as activists first,
Yeah.
and filmmakers second. They want to have an impact. And I think they're quite thrilled that, and even the controversy, whether it's in Miami Beach or elsewhere, does help elevate the profile of the film. So it doesn't actually hurt the film in terms of raising awareness publicly.
Before I let you go, I'm sure somebody's going to be wondering, hey, why isn't this documentary on a streamer that I subscribe to? Do we know? Do we have an answer to that?
Well, I did speak with the executive at Cinetic last night about that. I said, hey, what's going on with negotiations for that? He said that there are negotiations. There was the narrative that it had almost made it sound like it had been banned in the United States and Canada. No one would pick it up. And there may be truth to that, but at the same time, there were some offers. Cinetic felt like those were not serious offers in terms of money, but that is the big question. Will it land at for instance, a streamer? Could it be Netflix? Could it be one of the other ones? And these companies are very, very risk averse in the current political climate. I think they're very reluctant to potentially earn the opprobrium of the Trump administration. So there's a great deal of cautiousness in this arena. So we're going to have to wait to see that. But I think at the very least, it will become available on some form of video on demand, digital platform. But we'll see.
Matt, I appreciate your insight. I appreciate your reporting. I appreciate your wisdom. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Great to join you.
Yes, of course. We'll have you back anytime. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Matt Carey is a documentary editor at Deadline.com and co-host the Doc Talk podcast. He's based in Los Angeles, but we reached him in Copenhagen, where he's covering the Copenhagen International Documentary Festival. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We will be back tomorrow. I would love to see you then.